that is unusual simply because, that is unusual. There should be more time given than that. 3 days is nothing really.
Did you know about that one? Or was it...
No, I didn't know about that one. Do you know what probably might happen? Is that they might just lift everything up in big blocks.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're taking big clumps of it.
Oh right, yeah. So they're not excavating it per se. They're taking massive blocks of it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's they won't say where it is, but apparently, way back in time, there was a huge lake there, and that's why they're finding the fossils of all these sea plants.
Oh wow, that's brilliant! Nice, that's good to hear about that. Now, good. And Henry, now have you got the most important find ever to tell us about today?
Oh yeah, I have.
Oh wow! Hang on a minute. Stop. Therefore, Jane, you've got about a minute to find something else.
They're excavating a Roman fort in Yorkshire, and they've discovered, hold your breath, a soldier's stash of pistachio nuts from 2,000 years ago.
Really?
Yes. There you go.
Well, what with the content still in it?
Yeah, it's still there.
Oh my God, we like pistachio nuts, don't we?
I wouldn't recommend eating them.
Oh, yeah, that's you being a sap, isn't it? Oh, so is this like, what else is there about this site that you can tell us about?
I think they have found a lot of day-to-day artifacts of obviously Roman military life.
Yeah.
Bits of pottery, the normal types of things. So they're still digging a hole.
Did they find any statues of Lloyd George? Not
yet. They haven't gone down that far.
Oh yeah, because that's. Oh no, talking about Lloyd George, right? I was listening to a radio. You probably I get Radio 4+, so I get all of Radio 4 sort of knockoff stuff. And there was a thing on it about Lloyd George, right? And it was saying about Lloyd George and the influence on modern day politics and all the rest of it. And it sounded, it was an absolutely brilliant thing that it was saying about Lloyd George. And seeing as Lloyd George is related to me, that's great.
Wow, he knew what's on.
But by the way, Andrea's just joined us as well from Scotland.
Wow, great.
My God, actually, no, Jessica's now got 9 people. And Mike's going to turn up in a minute as well.
Where's the turkey?
Anyway, so we're gonna get started. We're gonna just get straight into it now. So that was a good array of news, to be honest with you. Oh, hang on a minute. You said that they're the greatest find ever made, right? Pistachio nuts. Jane failed to perform. So I'm going to have to come up with something. Oh, no. The greatest find ever made this week. Obviously, the dinosaur footprint on the beach. That's, yeah. Michelle, why can I smell something burning?
It's my toast.
It's your toast? Yeah. It smells like hair being burnt. Right. Okay, Jane.
Yes.
What do we know about the archaeology of North America? Anything?
In my case, nothing very much at all, until you remind me.
Oh.
Because I think you have told us a bit about it before.
But early stuff from North America.
Oh, right, okay.
No?
No.
What about you, Henry?
Thing that jumps out is Clovis people.
Ah, yeah, that does jump out. Yes. Tell us a little bit more.
That's it.
Oh, that is it.
Some dodgy Russians who came across the Bering Sea Peninsula.
Dodgy Russians. No, that hardly counts. What about you, Goff?
Well, I remember you told us about the mountains. The Mounts people.
Yeah,
That's right. I knew there was something.
And yeah, that's all we've done really, apart from, you know, sort of Central America, but not much on North America, apart from
right. So
mount,
today, yeah, go on. Sorry.
apart from the Mount people, and what was it called? Masa Verde.
Mesa Verde, yes, and Pueblo Bonito, yes, and all that, yes. So we've done that, but where we're going to go today is a lot earlier, right? So that's what we're going to nail. And just out of interest, are you there, Andrea?
Oh gosh. Hang on. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Well, oh gosh.
I know. Well, I was trying to do something, and then before I sat down, that's all.
Yeah, what you get up to in your own house is nobody's business.
Oh, I'm not in my house.
Where are you then? In the middle of a field?
Yeah.
Okay, we have started, but which part of the world are you in before Goff gets upset?
I'm in North Wales.
Oh, that's not even any part of the world.
Well, not really Wales. I'm in Chester, so
shut up. You're in Chester. All right, that's good. That's good. You should get us some photographs for our excursion, which is later on in the year. So.
Well, send me where the excursion is going. I'll go take some pictures.
Oh, we're going to see the. They're going to see the remains of the Roman amphitheatre. They're going to see the remains of the Roman wall. The remains of looking at the Grosvenor Museum. Anything relating to that would be great.
Okay, if I go near them, I'll have a look.
Good. Right, okay. Now we mentioned the Clovis people, didn't we? And wonderful wonderful Goff mentioned the mound builders of North America. Mike's just turned up. Mike, sit down. We've already started, so we've got to crack on. Right. So, Mike, do you want to sit by there? Right, good. Right. So we mentioned the mound builders. We mentioned Clovis. What does Clovis mean? Now, it used to be believed, in my day, back in the 1980s, that the earliest archaeology ever to be excavated in North America, ever to be excavated in the Americas, ever, was a site known as Clovis. Now, the early archaeological evidence of Clovis in North America says that the people of North America come over from the damnable Siberians, quoting your stuff, Henry, and they come over from Asia. That was 13,500 years ago, and that was it. That was the end of the world. That's when they got to North America. That's enough, isn't it, Mike? Good. However, a few years back, the year is 2000 and I think it's 2012, and then we go to 2015. By 2015, the numbers of sites in North America to be fairly old in the annals of archaeology. One was found in South America, and one was actually found in Pennsylvania. And the archaeological site that was excavated in Pennsylvania didn't date to 13,500 years ago. It's this site here. Didn't date to 13,500 years ago. It's the Meadowcroft site, dated to 16,000 years ago. So that meant that all the evidence from the Clovis site, which is in New Mexico and Texas, was actually younger than the stuff in Pennsylvania. And people started to argue, how is it the earliest evidence in North America is now in Pennsylvania? And the people who've been excavating at Clovis since the 1920s started to say that the people in Pennsylvania were lying. You know, there's no way that we could have earlier archaeology in Pennsylvania. But I think it was something to do with the fact that the in New Mexico, political vote in New Mexico, they were Republicans, and because Pennsylvania went Democrat, they were calling the Democrats the liars. Anyway, there's a little joke there. Sorry. Anyway, so Pennsylvania, they thought, right, you know, you can't get any earlier evidence than the Clovis site. But here it is. They started excavating, right? They've been excavating since the 1970s, but it was only by about 2015 that they realized that the stuff in Pennsylvania was 1,000, 2,000. We're talking about 2,500 earlier years at least than Clovis. So that basically means that the whole history of North America needs to be rewritten. And then the big one in South America, again, they found another site, and they find out that the people were the radiocarbon dated evidence from this other site in South America went back not 17,000 years ago, give it 18,000 years ago, not even 20,000 years ago, 22,000 years ago. So the earliest archaeological evidence in North America wasn't in North America, it was actually in South America, in the Americas. The earliest archaeology was in South America. So how did these people get to South America and not leave any evidence on the way, going all the way down to South America? And then you've got the argument that people got to North and South America from various different routes, right? And that's hopefully what we're going to look at today. So this site this is that site in Pennsylvania known as the Meadowcroft Rock Site, and cultural development in Pennsylvania. This process begins over 16,000 years ago. And the archaeologists argue in Pennsylvania that the archaeology is so old that it goes back to even 19,000 years ago. So you can imagine the people in New Mexico are saying, well, we have the earliest evidence. It's got to be the earliest evidence. Why isn't it that New Mexico actually shines in the archaeology of the world, and now it's been stolen by the Pennsylvanians? And then people started coming up with strange theories. And you can imagine this is quite easy. It doesn't take an expert to work this one out. The strange theories are that the evidence in South America is explained because people came over from Africa. Oh, did I just say that? And then people got to the Pennsylvania site because they came over on the ice sheets via Europe. Oh, God, terrible stuff, controversial. And then people got to the Clovis site via the Bering Straits. Oh, well, that's fine. We can accept that one. It's all right. It's not controversial at all. We'll do that one. It's all right. It's excellent. So basically, the site in Pennsylvania is a rock shelter site. Right? And what they've done is that the Pennsylvania site, like many sites in North America, when they find something really interesting in North America, what they do, they build a museum over it, and they label where all the archaeology is, and they indicate where everything is, and you can go there as a tourist and you can see what's going on, and you can really learn. So that's what they're doing in Pennsylvania. That's what they've done with the Clovis site as well. You can see the Clovis site undercover. And in other words, that's every one of these new sites in North America and South America and Central America. Forget Central America. We've already done that so many times. You know, everybody's so proud that they're so competitive to actually get to the golden eagle, the golden level of archaeology. Going back to Clovis again, what we do know about the Clovis site is that the Clovis site is very much associated with the Clovis site is very, very much associated with mammoth bones and mastodons. Mastodons are sort of little elephant type things, and mammoths, as we know, have got the big tusks and hair and all the rest of it. And long story short, the Clovis site, it's likely that the Clovis site is a piece of the first evidence on the planet. Back to the Clovis site, 13,500 years ago. The Clovis evidence itself might tell us about the first indicators of where the mammoth in North America may have become extinct. Because it's likely then eventually the Clovis site was abandoned. So, but then they are so competitive in North America. They are so competitive in North America. The Texans have got to do it themselves. Good old Texas, good old Confederate States of America. Texas itself, they excavate in Texas, and then they find out at another site that the archaeological evidence predates the Clovis site, which is just north of them in New Mexico. So, but this is good for archaeology. This is really good for archaeology. And it's really good for archaeology because people are going out there learning and wanting to learn more, which is very important, as we all know. And why is that very important? When we looked at the mound builders, and it's good that we did the mound builders, right? It's good that we did the mound builders of Detroit, and it's good that we did the mound builders of Idaho and Mississippi, and all of those states alongside the good old Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes. It's good we did all that, because one thing that we were saying was that you've got all this rich archaeology from the United States that predates the revolution and all the rest of it, and the settlers in North America by hundreds, if not thousands of years, but it was being actively destroyed. And that's the problem, because you've got archaeology in North America that's actively being destroyed because it predates anything that comes in line with those people coming over from the Western world, coming over from Europe. How dare they destroy it? But what they're doing with the earlier stuff, they're saying, we've made those mistakes. We've got to preserve the stuff from the mound builders from 1,000, 1,500 years ago, and so on and so on. And now what we've got to do, we've got to go out there and we've got to find the really early stuff. And this is causing a bit of a problem. The problem that this is causing, the very early stuff going back to 10,000, 12,000, 13,000, 22,000 years ago in North and South America. What this is doing is actually saying that the first people who got to North America and settled there, the first people who actually own North and South America, are actually the Native Americans. So this is a bit of a political thing now. The people who have actually got ownership of North America are not Afro-Caribbeans, are not the white people. It's actually the red people. And the DNA is telling us that the very early evidence of these people from these sites like Pennsylvania, Clovis, those sites in South America and all over the seaboards of North America as well. The DNA tells us that those Native Americans, actually, their roots go back not 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. So what we're talking about, we've got a great, we've got some great series of DNA now, and our DNA in Europe isn't that pure, you know. So anyway, I'm on the edge of getting a little bit racist there. So let's go away from that. So what we are talking about is Clovis, these Clovis points. Now, what's happened is that these Clovis points, they look really stunning. They look really nice. Yeah, really good stuff. Clovis points. Now, Clovis points, the Blackwater Draw site and other sites in Texas and other parts of the good old United States. What we're finding is the Clovis artifacts. The earliest sign in archaeology, right? Watch my words. The earliest sign in archaeology of early evidence in North America. But what now happens, folks, is that there's earlier archaeology again being found that predates this. And the one thing about predating this, folks, yeah, drum roll, is that the people who created these had developed the skill to create these from earlier forms of flint, chert, chalcedony, and obsidian materials. Okay, so in other words, we don't have people falling out of alien craft in Clovis and creating these wonderful points, creating these wonderful artifacts. There is earlier evidence again. Now that earlier evidence again, we know, hang on a minute, didn't we say there's early evidence in Pennsylvania? Oh, forget Pennsylvania, just chuck it over there. There's earlier evidence again south of New Mexico, right? And they're looking at sites in Texas near Austin, good old Austin in Texas. And the archaeological evidence from Austin takes the archaeological evidence back another 2,000 years with tools that are like this, but they're unifacial, right? These are bifacial. What bifacial means that they worked on both sides. Easy. So when you're watching Time Team, bifacial. Unifacial means that they worked on one side. And the unifacial stuff, struck down by hell, is the earlier stuff, because naturally one side, early stuff, two sides, later stuff, except it's not as easy as that. What we're talking about is the idea of seriation, right? We've got early man in the form of Mike behind me, advanced man in the form of Karl-James Langford, right? Cheers, Mike. That was good. See, that was a good way of looking at it, right? So in other words, things evolve and develop. Okay, and this is they thought about this. So what I'm going to do, right? Dare I use an article of the week? And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're gonna dare into article of the week territory. So this article of the week comes from 2018. Tell you what, guys, girls, everything from 2015 has exploded. It's almost as if everyone wants a bit of archaeology. Everyone, do you know what, right? This is the thing, you see, right? When that dinosaur footprint was found on the 25th of January, a Saturday, this year, 2021, since then, dinosaur footprints have been found in 2 or 3 other locations in the United Kingdom because people have actually gone out looking for them, right? There's been an explosion of dinosaur footprints. They're everywhere, right? There's even a dinosaur footprint that's been found, which is the most important ever, in Goff's garden. But that's all good stuff. So, Goff, can I ask why I'm looking at your feet?
And the Isle of Wight.
Well, they're in
And the
front
Isle of Wight. And the Isle of Wight. Hang on, there's the Monty Python sketch there. I'm Brian and so's my wife. Right, okay, let's look at this article of the week. By the way, Goff, I love your feet. I love them. Mind you, you've got, Goff, I've got that sort of bacterial sort of fungus on my feet and it's breaking away. Your feet look absolutely wonderful. So there you go.
You should be happy it's only on your feet.
Well, Michelle knows all about the fungus from me. So are you looking at this year? Archaeologists find 15,500-year-old sphere points in Texas. Yeah?
Yeah.
We're not going to do that lecture, Goff, remember? Never again. Okay. I got to revisit that again. It's like a whole hour of like a lecture. And I said, what we're looking at now is a castle, right? And what we're looking at now is something else. And then at the end, they all say, well, we only saw one image for the whole lecture. And I said, why didn't somebody tell me? And Goff said he was just liking listening to my voice. Moving on, excavation of the Friedkin site, the Deborah Friedkin site, northwest of Austin. Isn't it great? In North America, they named the site find after the archaeologists have found it, right? So if I found a 4-inch long carved phallus that belonged to a Roman general, it'd be called the karl-james Langford site. But they don't do that. Anyway, this site, the Friedkin site in northwest of Austin, good old Texas. A team of archaeologists identified a particular style of projectile point dated between 13,500 and 15,500 years ago. 2,000 years earlier than the earliest stuff found at Clovis, right? 2,000 years earlier. Even though it's Clovis technology, as you can see, it's not as refined as the other stuff. Just have a quick look. It's very different from this. Okay. Very different type, very, very different innovation, right? So this is really important stuff. So what we're talking about is known as a stemmed point, So this is earlier. Now, you can imagine, right? You can imagine this Friedkin site. They've got all this blooming funding from Austin University, millions of pounds, and they're thinking, right, we're gonna outdo New Mexico, as everyone outdoes New Mexico eventually, right? Finding 100,000 artifacts, 328 of these types of points, and 12 complete and fragmented projectile points. Amazing! But this is good academically because what they're doing is people are going to the edge. People are going to the edge of science and finding more and more of this information. It's like me and Michelle are looking for the golden, the holy grail of archaeology, trying to find a coin that relates to another Welsh prince, because one apparently is the only one has only ever been found in the whole of Wales throughout our entire history, right? Apparently, right? So we're going to find that golden coin somewhere. But in North America, instead of finding one site related to Clovis, they find dozens of them. They're over the moon. They just go out there and find these things all the time. So that's good for science. It's good for science. And they're able to look at North America, and they're able to open the eyes of people in North and South America and able to say, hang on, look a minute, right? There's a lot more going on than just a wave of people that have come over from the Bering Straits. What else is going on? There is no doubt these weapons were used for hunting game in the area at that time. And maybe what we're talking about is obviously this would eventually, in 2,000 years' time after that, lead to the eventual extinction of the mammoth and the mastodon. These types of sites in Texas and New Mexico were eventually abandoned after a few hundred, if not 1,000 odd years. The stuff in Pennsylvania wasn't, because in the United States, even today, you've got several different types of people. You've got those types of people who live in woodland and forest and along the Great Lakes, and you live people in sort of endless tundra plains of North America. And those are the two types of different people. And you've got other sort of people who live along the coast and so on. It's not as simple as that. So where the food was running out, and the likes of later on, we got the likes of Pablo Bonito, thousands of years later, and Mesa Verde. They suddenly food gets scarce, they move away, and it's always happening down that New Mexico and Texas and all the rest of it. In Pennsylvania, people are living at the Pennsylvania site at Meadowcroft from the 15,000, 16,000 years ago, all the way up until the time of the American Revolution. So the discovery is significant because as you see, the discovery is significant because almost all pre-Clovis sites have stone tools, but spear points have yet to be found. So the interesting thing is, well, so what we've got these wonderful tools, and we've got these stemmed points, and we've got things that are a little bit different from the Clovis sites that have been excavated. So what we're talking about is, this is a dream. The dream has always been to find diagnostic artifacts, projectile points that can be recognized as older than Clovis, and this is what we have found at the Frenken site. They're finding projectile points, they're finding hundreds of thousands of artifacts that actually predate the Clovis site. Now, this is a very interesting chart, and the reason why this is a very interesting chart is that's where we're going to go now. But there was a question that was asked on Tuesday, so this is really, really good. And you're lucky to get the best of me this morning, because I was absolutely terrible yesterday afternoon. I collapsed in the lecture. So I'm going to keep things going, babes. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this plan, right? We're going to zoom in. I've got another bit of detail. So what we're going to do, that there is a pre-Clovis. You can see that that's very different from the Clovis stuff. There's a pre-Clovis site from this one of the ones that, from the one of the 12. I was 100,000 artifacts from this site at Texas. So what we're going to do, I'm going to try. Yeah, here we go. Love it. This is really interesting. The reason why this is really interesting, it sort of puts a little bit more understanding and meat on the bones of all these words I'm giving you. If you're glazing over, you're not going to glaze over now. So what's happening is you look at this and you say, right, it was once believed that people managed to get to this Clovis site somehow, and then their technology spread all the way across America, right? And now what we know, right? Now what we know is, if we go to the first map, they're saying actually what happened is that people got to this Clovis site via the coast, right? They got via the coast to this. No, not the Clovis site, the pre-Clovis site, the one that we're talking about, the Fredkin site. Then they moved to the Clovis site, and then they moved not elsewhere in North America. Blow me, you've got this Meadowcroft site. So where did that evidence come from, right? You can see these very strange arrows here. Where's this arrow? Where's the direction of this arrow coming from? Is this saying that people come from the Pacific Islands? Are they coming from the coast? How did these artifacts get to Monteverde in South America? How did Monteverde? This is very interesting. So we've got archaeological evidence in Monteverde. We round that up to 14,500 years ago. We've got the Clovis stuff 13,500 years ago. We've got this stuff over in Meadowcroft there. You can see the Meadowcroft stuff is saying 14. We've got 16,000 years ago. You've got this other stuff here at the Fredkin site on the other map dating back to 15,500 years ago. Let's try and make a little bit more sense of this. Let's try and make a little bit more sense of this. The way we do that, somebody said, now I'm confused. I said, there's an answer, right? And that's where we're going to go. So the answer is, I'm going to put up on my screen now. We're gonna do this now. Bingo. There. This Antarctic ice core data really helps us out. So, and the reason why this really helps us out, to understand what's going on in North America, forget about the Clovis points and the stem points and the stuff from the Meadowcroft site and Monteverde and all the rest. Forget about all that now. Let's just try and work out what's going on, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to get a little, we're going to get a nice little bit of a line there, sort of, we're going to get in there. And what you can see, right, is that people may have been heading into North America and South America at times that the temperature may have been a lot higher. There's two ways of looking at this. Is the first way. There you go. 90,000 years ago, they may have been able to get, they may have been able to wander across North and South America, right? There you go. Another peak there, 60,000 years ago. Another peak, 45,000 years ago. And another peak, they're moving into the Americas and moving around, and that's what's going on. But other experts say that's nonsense. What could be happening is that people are actually getting to North America when you've got access via ice sheets, whether it's from Europe or more likely from the Bering Straits. So there you go. Maybe because the ice sheets are very much visible and very much accessible at the Bering Straits, maybe they're getting to North America, and maybe they're coming over from Europe beyond 60,000 years ago, when the ice may have linked Europe with Iceland and Greenland and then over to North America, getting to Pennsylvania. That's one theory. It's not a popular theory. And the most popular theory is via the Bering Straits, via Siberia. And there's the other one. Maybe they actually come by sea or via the Pacific Islands, and maybe they come from Africa. That's something else. You can actually see there, 50,000 years ago, you can see that there's also a mini ice age, right? These points here, when it's very, very cold, 18,000 years ago, that may explain Clovis, where you got more waves of people getting into North America. Now, the big question is, the ice core data is very, very useful for us. But what does all this mean? What all this means is you've got to open your eyes. It's likely that people are getting into North America and South America a lot earlier than we ever thought. And that's where the evidence is coming from. Now, I can remember about 2012, when I was sat in the classroom in Arnside in Cumbria. And I remember sat down and I remember this new information had come in about earlier stuff in North America and South America, right? And the Pennsylvania stuff wasn't too, it was a bit in the air back then, right? And we basically said, right, all we had really was Clovis and the Monteverde site. We thought, hang on a minute. Clovis is 13,500 years ago. The Monteverde site is 14,500 years ago. So people got to South America before they got to North America. How does that happen? Right. And we started to get very confused. So in other words, I think the answer is there are many ways of getting into North and South America, and there's just not the one route. It's just not the one route via Siberia and the Bering Straits and the Chilean Islands. It's not just the one route. Right, there are various different routes to actually get there. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually move away from this again, right? So we're going to move away, and there we go. And to be honest with you, I'm actually doing extremely well today. In a sense, I'm strange enough, I'm in a flow and I get through it really fast, so I'm gonna have to slow down a little bit. So here we go. So what we got, this back to this Texas site, right? And hopefully what we are seeing on the screen, oh yeah, we are looking at Texas site, back to this Texas site. The Clovis people may have invented the Clovis point, but what led up to creating the Clovis point was actually these other wonderful points from these sites in Texas. And it's saying there a spear-shaped weapon made of stone that is found in Texas and in parts of the United States and in New Mexico and northern Mexico. And the weapons are made to hunt animals, including mammoth and mastodons. The findings expand our understanding of the earliest people to explore and settle North America. But what about South America? The people of the Americas during the end of the last ice age was a complex process. The peopling, what's going on? And this complexity is seen in their genetic record. Now we are starting to see this complexity mirrored in the archaeological record. So, and also the DNA, right? The DNA itself is telling us that the Native Americans that are wandering around today, those that have survived the slaughter and butchering by people from Europe and Africa, that those people that have survived can trace their DNA back to these people 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, right? But the question is, where did they come from? Where did they come from? And I don't think the answer will ever be answered in our lifetimes. And one reason for that is, and I think the point is, when I mentioned the Arnside class, I didn't mention the following, right? The following thing I wanted to mention was that when I sat in that room that day, right? And I don't know how many times I've said this to you. In a few years' time, everything I'm telling you will be predated by something else. You know, the archaeological record will go back 500 years earlier. I didn't think it was going to go back 2,000 or 3,000, 5,000 years earlier than I thought. So things are catching up. Things are really catching up. And it would be really interesting, like maybe in a year's time, to revisit Australia, because there's some really exciting stuff going on in Australia, and seeing that in Australia they've actually managed to get the boundaries back 100,000 years. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? And I think as humans we're realizing that we've made many mistakes in saying that these people are from this place, these people are from that place. We've become very racist, right? And we've become very sort of, you know, we own this place because of this, and all these things are now wrong. I think what we need to do, we need to expand our knowledge and say people are people. We've got to these localities and leave it there, because all this stuff about Black Lives Matter and White Lives Matter, for me, I think is a load of nonsense, because things are changing all the time. And we've got to be very careful, because the archaeology has given us a different message, which and that message is that things are very different from what we believe. So what I'd like to do is actually get to those, get back to those images that we were looking at. Hang on, if I can screen share that. And what I would like to do is go back again, and here we go. Now this is the excavated Clovis site, right? And what they're trying to say is, look, you know, we need to get academically, we need to get out there, and we need to say, look, this is what's going on. This is the archaeological evidence, and in many ways, this is changing policy in North America, because it was always one-sided. It was always about those from Europe and Africa, and now what they're starting to say is, actually, you know, these people were here a long time before us. Here's the archaeological evidence. That's the message out there. And it's very dangerous for me to talk like this, but then again, I'm telling you what the facts are. But then again, there is a bias in my soul. I'm very much pro-Native American. So that might be sort of altering how I'm looking at this. But then again, is it? Because this is based on archaeological evidence. So what I'd like to do is go look at this Meadowcroft site and give you a little bit more information about that, and sort of moving away from Clovis. And what I'd like to do is go to our Meadowcroft site and then go back to Clovis. But before the break, we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this image, right? But we are not doing the break yet. We're going to look at where we're going to go. So what we're going to look at now, we're going to look at the Meadowcroft rock shelter, right? and the turkeys wandered in to keep us company. So we've got turkey down there as well. So we've been joined by somebody else now as well. So we're looking at the Meadowcroft site. There's the Meadowcroft site there it is. It's in Pennsylvania, and it's near the lowest of the Great Lakes. A river system fed along river systems. You can see the Meadowcroft site, and there's all these different interesting Indian mound and so on. There's Meadowcroft. You can have a look at this, and you can see it, and there it is. And there are all the different layers at the Meadowcroft site. So if we sort of go back to this, and let's see what we can actually learn. Let's see if we can move back the boundaries and the barriers of those mound builders. Well, there is one interesting question I need to put in there and just leave it. What's happening in North America, particularly North America, not so much South America, because they're getting more answers in South America because they're more open-minded. What I mean by that in South America, in our lectures, we've looked at the Inca, we looked at the Chacapoya people, we've looked at the people of the Amazons basin, and we've basically said, look, we've got people living within this landscape for thousands of years, yeah, and we can even go further back, and we're starting to look at we're looking at the sites in Brazil, and we're looking at the sites in South America as well. And in North America, the problem is that they've got all this early stuff. They've got all the mound builder stuff from 1,000, 2,000 years ago. But what's in between? That's the problem. What's in between? What's the stuff in between? There's a missing history of North America. And I think that's a great challenge then. How did things move from Clovis to a big gap in the middle to later Native Americans? We do have some answers at Pennsylvania, but this is probably one of the only sites that we have some of those answers. So there's a lot more to learn in North America, and they are far more advanced in South America. And things are going to change. The map's going to change of what we know. It's like missing the Bronze Age in Britain. So we go from the Neolithic period, we miss the Bronze Age, and we go straight to the Iron Age. This is what we're talking about. So this site itself, a rock shelter site at a bluff known as Cross Creek, and it's likely as well. This is a tall deal, right? And the tall deal is as follows. When we go to Jericho, we've looked at Jericho really recently. We looked at Jericho. We looked at the Kathleen Kenyon excavations at Jericho, and I said that look at this. We've got evidence of a city at Jericho going back 8,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, with a wall around it, people living there, civilization. And we suddenly get to that from about 12,000 years ago, right? Yeah, great. But eventually Jericho's abandoned. Yeah, the site's eventually abandoned about 2,000 years ago or thereabout, and then with this Pennsylvania site, the Meadowcroft site, it's almost as if we've got you're looking at layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of archaeology, going back 19,000 years. People have lived there. Again, this is the one that gives more of the answers than any other place in the United States. Those missing answers. 19,000 years people have lived more or less in that locality. 19,000 years until the American Revolutionary Wars of the 1770s, 1776, 1780, 1779 and 1782. So people abandoned the site because of that, right? The native link with that site was lost. How dare we destroy that native link? But that native link. So people have been living there nearly 19,000 years, and suddenly we come along and we kill everybody, right? That's what we do, right? But that would represent one of the longest occupied sites anywhere on the planet, right? There was no wall around it, right? There was no running. There was no sort of drainage systems and all the rest of it. But people have been living there for a very, very long time. So when you think about this site, if you want to put it if you want to put it into sort of an average 24-hour day, right? And you want to think, right, 001 is the first time that somebody occupied the Meadowcroft site. And they occupied this site until 2,300 hours and 50 minutes, right? That's how long people had been living at this site. And the few years that we've been living are the few years without people living at the site. This is our incredibly long period. It's like waking up and not having a cup of tea until 2350 hours. You know, it's a long time for people to be at the site. So we're looking at very accurate dating, sequences of dating, which people at Clovis don't like. They don't like that. People at Clovis have sort of conceded that the archaeological data at the site goes back to 16,000 years ago. So the site itself, near Pittsburgh, it's got its sort of lots of stuff. Is lots of excavation. They know the tribal people. It's the Monongahela people. The Monongahela people. Some of the descendants of the people who originally lived at the site 19,000 years ago live within that landscape today. Not at the site, but live within that landscape today. That is amazing, I think. And this is in the box of saving America's greatest treasures. Okay, Goff, we joke about it, and I joke about it. We all do. Greatest treasures on the planet. We're trying to talk about when people got to North America. Let's just help us understand. This is in that tick box of probably the 20 most important archaeological sites on the planet, right? It's in there. It's in that top 20, right? It would be silly for me to talk about the top 3, right? But it's in the top 20. So Native Americans have actually.
I've got to go.
Why, Jane? If you leave me now, you take away the great, and a turkey singing as well. So Jane, what are you doing next week?
I should be with you next week. I'll probably come online again.
All right then.
Okay.
Jessica's going to miss you, but I will. Jane, I will see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Take care, Jane, and we're just going to mention a groundhog. See you then. Bye.
Bye.
She's going to not know about the mysteries of the groundhog. She's going to stay on and listen to it. Oh, she just missed it. The story about the groundhog missing. Basically, when this site itself. Now, this is another thing as well. This is another thing, right? In North America, finding these archaeological sites are like finding a slightly different coloured piece of straw in a huge straw bale. You know, with slightly different colour, right? And going through every single, this is what this is like, trying to find a site like this. North America is just so vast. South America is so vast. I mean, the Americas is vast, right? In Britain, we will find, for the next 1,000 years, the odd new archaeological site every year, you know? Things will be found all the time, right? But in North America, new archaeology will be found for tens of thousands of years, right? And the reason why that is because vast tracts of North America and South America are not built on, where vast tracts of Great Britain are built on. So inevitably, and finding our archaeology is a lot easier than finding archaeology in North America. And lots of the early stuff in North America is actually found by complete accident. For example, this site itself was found in 1955 when a certain Albert Miller found artifacts from a groundhog burrow. And lo and behold, as he looked again, he saw more artifacts on the groundhog burrow. There's a Groundhog Day. Never mind, there was a joke there. But anyway, in 1955, he found all these artifacts, which looked very, very early. Very, very early. Unfortunately, after he'd taken it to the museum, nobody did anything with these artifacts until 1973. 1979, the University of Pittsburgh excavated there. More excavations in 1989, 1990. But it wasn't until 2015, after excavating 12 foot of archaeological data, that they actually started to realize that the stuff is really, really early at this site. It's actually pre-Clovis, or as I said, pre-COVID. It is actually pre-COVID, pre-Clovis. So in other words, the site itself also has yielded many tools. You know, the bifacial artifacts, you know, napped on one side. So that's unifacial, and you've got the bifacial, and you've got chipping debris and all these other things. So recoveries of note include lots of points and flint from Ohio and jasper from eastern Pennsylvania. All these wonderful artifacts, and even artifacts from the Atlantic coast that have been traded inland. So the Meadowcroft site gives us the largest collection of flora and fauna ever located and excavated anywhere in North America. The arid environment provided the necessary and rare conditions that permitted excellent botanical preservation. So even though it's in Pennsylvania and within a sort of wooded landscape, it was still fairly arid, which is rather interesting. So animals represented at the site represent, lo and behold, 149 species. 149 species of fauna have been excavated at the site. That's a massive amount of fauna excavated at the site, representing naturally occurring animals that weren't killed or butchered. We're talking about small game animals. We're talking about bigger animals like turkeys. They found the remains of turkey. Good. As you know, turkeys come from North America. They found archaeological evidence of corn, squash, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and other archaeological evidence, given radiocarbon dates dating the earliest back to 19,000 years ago. However, this is very controversial. It wasn't until 2015 that this was sort of believed. The results come out in 2013. And lots of archaeologists rejected the findings. They said, there's no way, there's no way people could have ever got to North America 19,000 years ago. There's no way. We're Clovis archaeologists. And a lot of archaeologists said, why not? Why can't you believe this? Why can't you believe this? They say that radiocarbon dates could have been contaminated by coal-bearing rocks, for example, and have been contaminated. But what they're doing now is using mass spectrometry dating to actually give the earlier dates, so not using radiocarbon dating. So if this is all authentic and proved, this is a much pre-earlier Clovis world, lot earlier. So this means that people were in North America 5,000-6,000 years before Clovis. So the Meadowcroft rock shelter represents human habitation that is very, very complex, very, very interesting, and very, very groundbreaking. So I'm probably going to have to take a break in a minute. So what we're talking about is nearby. There's another site. It's called the karl-james site, and at the karl-james site, which is very nearby, they found the remains of a 2-year-old child, which is probably a little bit dated, but those remains within this landscape represent one of the oldest burials ever discovered on the planet from about 12,000 years ago. We've got lots of firsts in North and South America. So here we go. The Meadowcroft is so important because the pre-Clovis artifacts from the Meadowcroft rock shelter include such a wide range of pre-Clovis artifacts and post-Clovis artifacts, Clovis artifacts, and this is massively important. And the protection of the site is very, very well deserved. And people see this site as being the evidence that has always been required to really understand what's going on in North America. We'll just have a quick look at these images. And there's the archaeology preserved in this building, and all these different layers. So what's happening is as the rock shelters collapsed, big chunks of rock material from the roof has actually buried the archaeology. So this is all why it's there and all really well preserved. These little markers indicate all the layers of the archaeology, which you can actually clearly see. So you're able to read the archaeology in all the different layers. And this is what the site once looked like back when the site was originally found in 1955. These are really original excavations in 1979. So they actually decided we're going to need to preserve this site long term because it's a major archaeological resource in North America. But after the break, we're going to look at this site in South America, which has got much earlier evidence. But back to this site in Pennsylvania, we've got our site in Pennsylvania. So what I'm going to do, right, I need to take a break. So we were going to look at that little this little map, which we'll do after the break. So let's see if there are any questions. Andrew, have you got any questions from you before we have this break?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
No, no questions. No questions. No, I haven't got any questions today.
Good. What about you, Mike? Mike, can I have that dress back next week? You know, the red one? Yeah, Mike said I can have it back. Henry, you'll have the dress back.
Excellent.
You got rid of the stains, have you, Mike? The grass stains on the knees? He reckons he's got rid of them. I don't believe a word he's saying. Right, Henry, anything you'd like to say?
Just thinking about how people actually could have got to North America. I sent you a little link of a map of islands that actually stretch right across the Atlantic.
I gotta type in that now, and I'm gonna.
And on some of them, the Azores, for instance, I think they've discovered megalithic constructions, which they're still investigating. So you've got another option.
So obviously coming from so we'll show. Oh bloody hell! This is really simple. We've got to do this now. We got to do this now. So so what we're talking about is that's not what you usually see, is it? So
No.
you don't really think of it like that, because even though obviously they represent reefs, and obviously the islands are much smaller than that, but you do see that you could, if there's the ice sheets are not going to go that far south, but
The water levels will be lower.
bingo, and therefore there would be more reefs and land masses to see. So you could stretch your imagination and move from Africa and Europe, more like Africa, across that. And that does make a lot more sense. When you look at it that way, it puts a different perspective on it, doesn't it?
I thought I'd give you another curveball.
That's definitely a massive curveball. That's like that's a revolutionary curveball. Yeah, I like that. I really do. I really do. Yeah, gobsmacked because I can't digest that. That's great. Thank you for that. Right. So what we need to do is Goff, and we'll have our break, darling.
Yeah, no questions, but very thought-provoking. Very good. Thank you.
So we'll have a 15 memento break, and we shall be back. We will pause the recording, and I will mute me and Mike and Michelle, and we'll go from there. Right. So we'll be back.
Well, I mean, the old boy,
Right, gay boys, we're back to it.
be on the farm, he was 70 when I knew him. So that was 30, 40 years ago I lived on the farm.
Are we all ready, folks?
Yeah.
Do you want another drink, Mike? Just a bit.
Right, there you go. Where is everybody? It's just me and there he is. Look at him there. Yeah, good. I got to ask, Henry, when was the last time you had a haircut?
2 weeks ago.
6 years ago. Yeah, I can imagine. Right, okay, let's try and get back into it. Right, okay, where were we? We were going to have a look at that. And, right. Okay, share screen. Bingo, right, okay, we are now back to it. So, one thing I was going to do before the break was this little map. Now, what I'd like to do is just go a little bit further back, and I'd just like to just recap on what we... Hang on a minute. 1 second, is Jess calling in? 1 second, stay there, guys. Hiya, Jess, we just started again.
Oh, right, okay, Carl, sorry, I was talking to the member.
All right.
Yeah, everything's all going good, so I'll
Okay.
bring you afterwards.
Yeah, so any news from Lantwit, because they can all hear you?
No, everything's all good. We've managed to connect to the TV today, so
Excellent.
see things on a bigger screen.
So what time are you due to finish?
In half an hour, possibly a little bit later.
Yeah, give me. I'll give you a ring about 1:45 then. Okay.
Okay, take care, Carl.
Anyway, give my love to everybody. And Andrea and Jane are with me today, and we've got Henry and Goff, and Michael, and a woman called Michonne. So yeah.
Great, that's perfect. You've got a nice little squad going on then.
So I haven't got any signs of Ellen today, but that's life.
Well, hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yes, yeah, that's true. So all right then. Give my love to everybody. If there's no other news from anybody else, no.
No, everything's all good. Everything's happy.
Okay, give my love to everybody, and we'll go from there.
All right, take care, Carl. Bye.
Take care, Jess. Bye. Bye. A legitimate call, guys. Right. So what we were talking about, I just wanted to sort of bit of a recap. So we've gone from this wonderful site in Pennsylvania, and we've looked at that, and we've had a little good analysis of that, the Meadowcroft site. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at we're going to have a little look at Clovis. We're going to look at the Clovis site in a little bit of detail. But before we do that, I want to look at the map that I said we were going to look at before the break. So to think about how far we've come in archaeology, so we've got this Meadowcroft site, we've got all this stuff at the Clovis site, and this is that earlier piece from Texas, and the Clovis site, and Clovis, and there we go, Clovis cultural artifacts there, which we'll have a look at again, and we've mentioned about different maps and so on, and then we've come to this. We've come to this, and this is a rather interesting map. Because the reason why this is interesting is because it shows a lot more sites than just Clovis. So what we're going to do, we're going to put the little bit of a star on there. We need to. This doesn't actually show the Clovis site at all, which is a bit odd. So we've got Clovis there, and we've got the Texas stuff. So it used to be believed that the earliest stuff in North America, if we want to type this in, for Clovis was roughly 13,500. So if we put that in there, and we put the master site in there, that's there, and we've got Clovis. So that was the oldest bit of archaeology in North America up until 2 decades ago. Now everything has changed. But what you will see about this is something very, very odd. So the oldest bits of archaeological evidence that we know about in North America today are as follows. The Bluefish site, which is beyond 20,000 years ago. We've got this site at Toca da Tirapea. And also what we do find is the other site that we're going to look at is also in that vicinity, which will turn out to be a lot earlier than 22,000 years ago. So by quickly looking at this, you can see that two of the oldest sites in North America are thousands of miles apart. So how are people in South America within a few thousand years of the people in North America? What's all that about? Really, really interesting. So we'll leave that question open and we won't answer it. Now, next, the sites that are as old or older than 16,000 years ago happen to be the Meadowcroft site that we've looked at. We've looked at on the east seaboard, this site, the Topper site. We also see that that's rather strange. So two other sites from 16,000 or 16,000 years ago seem to be on the eastern seaboard. So as we stand, there's no real correlation. And now we do have the other site that is in Texas, that is near Clovis, that also dates from around 16,000 years ago as well. So then we put this next thing into the mix. So let's look at all sites that are 14,000 and over 14,000 years old. Now this makes it interesting. So we go to Monteverde. So we've got archaeological evidence at Monteverde. We've got this site, Huaca Prieta. That's in South America as well. 14,000 or more years ago. So that's 15,000 years ago. We then go to the likes of Mississippi and we go to Buttermilk Creek. We also go to the eastern seaboard, Cactus Hill. We also go to this site, Page Ladson, which is in Florida. We go to Saltville, South Carolina. Triquet Island, which is in Canada. We go to Paisley, which I do believe is in Northern California, I think, or thereabout. And then we go back to South America and we go to the Tama site. And overnight, there is no correlation with the archaeology in North America. It's almost as if there has to be one more way of getting to North America than just via the Bering Straits. There has to be more than the theory that gives it that the only way you can get to North America is this way. There's got to be other ways. Because if you're going into North America via the Bering Straits, you would see that the earliest evidence in North America would be, in fact, all the way along here and then would spread out. But that's not what's happening, because even when you try to put that into some kind of equation, it doesn't make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly say this. It's likely that there is this route into North America. Looking at the earlier evidence at Meadowcroft, there might be a European route. There might also be an Atlantic Ocean route. By the looks of this one, where's this one coming from? Need I say Africa? And then you might actually see that there might be another route as indicated from that other pan from the Pacific Islands. So in other words, it's quite likely that there are many different routes into North America, but there's one problem with that theory, a massive problem with that theory, and we're going to look at this as well. And the huge problem with that theory, the big question mark is that 80% of the DNA tells us that the Native Americans derived from places directly in Asia or Siberia, but that opens 20% of the DNA. It tells us that people got to North America via other routes. Yeah, this is why this little map was so important. Moving on. Do you know, I'd like to find out. I'm not going to ask Goff or Andrea, but Henry, what would you say? What if open-minded, right? You're really biased. You've got just put a biased mindset in, right? You're convinced that all of these people have come from Siberia. Prove it to me. Come on, Henry. Prove it. Argue it. Come on.
It doesn't stack up.
No, you go on. You've got to try and prove the theory. Go on, prove the theory.
I don't think you can.
No, prove the theory. You're struggling, aren't you?
Yeah, because the more you look at the map and the locations, it's quite clear that they're coming in from all sorts of locations.
Now, that's what I like. 80% of the DNA says Siberia, but 20% says elsewhere. Now, this is what's really, really impressive and really, really what's important. The only way, right, if I want to do this really scientifically, right, the only way we can possibly argue that people all came from Siberia is that all the earlier sites have either been destroyed or washed into the sea. But when you use that theory, when you look at Australasia, for example, we were looking at this with Australasia, if you remember. There was a plan of Australia, and the earliest evidence in Australia was along the south coast of Australia. That was where the earliest stuff was. And then there were arguments that all the early evidence, all the early sites to get to that site, maybe 100,000 years ago in Australia, has actually been inundated with water, and all that evidence has been lost. But we still haven't found that evidence yet. So in other words, it doesn't stack up at all. I'll go with you on that one. It just doesn't stack up.
The other thing is that you've got vast areas here that haven't actually been explored or looked at for any other early occupation.
There's been no archaeological evidence or excavations in any of these areas. That's completely correct. That there are whole. If we want to clear all those arrows on there, let's just clear all those arrows, right? Let's just play to that whim there, right? The areas that we've got very little data of would be down here, across this whole landscape, all the way across here, right? We've got more of the Andes. We've got very little evidence of places like this. Can you remember when we did the Darien Peninsula?
Yeah.
Archaeologists won't even go there. Yeah? We've got areas like Mesa Verde. We've been looking at the main sites, but we could put across there. Other places like Canada, right? Those areas are really badly explored, right? We could actually even chuck in some of the Caribbean islands. There's no archaeology. We've got nothing from the Caribbean islands in this table at all, right? So all those crosses, even, you know, we really don't have the evidence yet. We really can't call it. And if this was a penalty shootout, right? Only one person has scored a penalty, and nobody else has kicked the ball yet. That's the information we've got. So we're basically saying, actually, the person who scored a penalty is actually from Asia. So therefore, that means that Asia is going to win the game. But probably the problem is that that's all we've got. We need a couple more penalties for the Asian side for Asia to win. And even then, there might be something else underneath the surface. So you can't win the game until the last penalty's been scored, right? So moving on again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about Clovis, and I'm going to talk about this weird site which is near Toca de Tira Paya, which actually changes the game, Henry. I haven't been fair with you all today. The game changes. So let's go back to Clovis. Let's sort of look at the Clovis evidence again. Nice, like it. We've got all this type of material found from the Clovis site. There it is. And there we go, the archaeological excavations there. We've got a mammoth skull sticking up. I think that's a mastodon skull, actually, because actually they're not mammoth teeth, are they? So anyway, we got a lower mandible of some fauna there, excavating at the Clovis site. And let's just chuck into this. Let's just get straight into this now. So I'm just gonna muck around with my screen a little bit, and we've done our Meadowcroft site. Let's see what we got with Clovis, right? So the Clovis culture, that's what it's called, the Clovis culture. It was believed 1920s and 1930s, uncalibrated, that it was very early evidence. There was no radiocarbon dating back then. However, it was in the 1950s and 60s that we were starting to learn that Clovis, the ancestors, the indigenous people of the Americas, must have been in America at least 13,500 years ago. This is what the evidence is telling us. Now, what we do find is that we've got this one human burial. Right, I mentioned that other burial near Pennsylvania. We've got this one human burial from the Anzik site, and it's a human burial that's got artifacts associated with the burial. So that again makes it a very, very old burial in North America, again dating back to around 12,000 years ago. So the Clovis culture itself, it seems, was, the archaeologists believe, an early advancement of people in North America, right? They believed that they managed to get there, and they managed to develop in New Mexico and Texas, and everything was fine. And then there was a cold spell called the Younger Dryas period, which is a cold climate change, which is a mini ice age within an ice age, right? And this probably caused places like Clovis to become slowly abandoned. After the discovery of the Clovis sites in New Mexico, more and more sites were discovered, which would indicate that at an early stage, people were living across most of North America, at least 13,500 years ago, because they started finding sites that have those wonderful Clovis napped lithics, napped flint, napped obsidian. They started to find sites all the way across North America. And then as we know, what we're finding that Meadowcroft, we've got evidence going back 19,000 years. However, when archaeologists were getting very, very upset with the archaeological evidence of Pennsylvania, in Chile, they found the Monteverde site. So you can imagine. But by the way, in North America, we found even earlier evidence that predates even Pennsylvania by 3,000 years. So you got Monteverde. You got archaeological evidence of people being in North America 22,000 years ago, which is quite stunning. And then there's another site that was found in Brazil not so many years ago, at Pedra Furada, which is the cat amongst the pigeons. So what they do say, before we go into that cat amongst the pigeons, what we do see with all the evidence, which is known as the Clovis culture, Clovis tools themselves were produced for roughly around 300 years continuously. Everything that you're seeing on the screen, that was produced for at least 300 years by these people over different areas of North America. And it was in the 1930s and 1930s that they actually started to realize. The other thing as well is what they did find is Clovis people are generally accepted to have hunted mammoths, as well as extinct forms of bison, mastodon, sloths, tapirs, camelops, even early forms of horses and other small animals. And we know that because Clovis points have been found within the bone assemblages of these animals that we've so described. We know as well that they had a massively rich diet. We know at the Pennsylvania site, for example, which predates these Clovis sites, we know that they've got a very rich diet, 149 animals identified there, and hundreds of different species of plants identified there as well. But the Clovis sites themselves, we know that they're eating at least 125 different varieties of plants and animals. So they've got a very, very rich diet. And they're also starting to look now that in a place called Sonora in Mexico, they've got evidence of Clovis Clovis flints at this site in Mexico, dating back to 13,390 years ago. So 13,400 years ago makes some of this Clovis site in Mexico one of the oldest. But now we do find at the site in Texas very, very early evidence that we're actually talking about. We're talking about, you know, these pre-Clovis artifacts. Where did people go then? Big question, Matt. Leave that there. Right. People thought that people used to believe that because the Clovis evidence was the earliest evidence dated back to 13,500 years ago, that because they got a bit bored of that area and we're going to go on to the disappearance of the Clovis people, they must have moved to South America and all the rest of it and started populations there in Pennsylvania. But there are earlier populations than that we now know about pre-Clovis people. So what happened to the Clovis people quickly? The most commonly held perspective on the end of the Clovis culture is that there's a kind of megafauna, all these massive mastodons and mammoths combined with an overall increase in a less mobile population led to local differentiation in lithics and cultural traditions. So in other words, people moved elsewhere. They started to spread out from this Clovis location to other parts of North America. However, they start to hit a very cold period. Now, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? We know that cold period happened roughly around 12,900 years ago. It was a very, very cold period indeed. Was it a period when more people got into North America? Was it a period that people had to move on? We don't really know. So the Clovis site itself was found by absolute accident. It was originally found in 1908. There was a flash flood at the locality, Clovis locality in New Mexico, at the Clovis locality known as Folsom in New Mexico. And when they found the remains of an American bison, an extinct American bison in 1908, they decided to excavate there in 1926, 1927. And what they did find was they actually found one of these flints lodged into a slaughtered bison. They actually found that one of the bisons had been slaughtered. And they actually found, so in other words, you've got bison that are naturally occurring in the area. 29th of August, 1927, they actually found one of these points, which was embedded in a bison. And that basically meant they were onto a very, very early site. So throughout the 1920s and 30s, they started finding site after site that has this Clovis archaeological evidence, including a site known as Blackwater. So this is a really interesting thing. So we're calling it Clovis First, which is basically one of the first points of Native Americans. Available genetic data show that the Clovis people are the direct ancestors of roughly 80% of all living Native American populations in North and South America. And the DNA of the Anzac boy from, which is associated with Clovis evidence, which is nearby, which is in Montana, that boy showed DNA evidence in 2014 directly relating to these Clovis people and connecting to the peoples of America, one of the great ancestors of 80% of all Native Americans. So we now believe that Clovis isn't the only site which has very early archaeological evidence. And the site that we're going to actually go on to now is the Pedra Furada site. So that's where we're going to go next. So let's go to the Pedra Furada site. Let's just look at some more images. So we'll just move away from Clovis. So the Clovis site, and we've got the artifacts, Clovis, this chart showing you the movements of people that we've mentioned, this wonderful map that we showed earlier on. We've been to a wonderful site in Pennsylvania, and then we come to here. This is a very intriguing, interesting site. There's the Pedro Ferrada site. And the Pedro Ferrada site is evidence of various generations into more recent times of painting, rock art, and all these other wonderful things. And excavating at the Pedro Ferrada site. And we then see more evidence of Clovis. So Pedro Ferrada site, the evidence is rather different from all of this. Okay, so what we're going to look at is if we go back again. So again, more of the Clovis site. So if we go back again and we go to Pedro Ferrada, within sight of this wonderful rock formation, within the caves at Pedro Ferrada, they started to find something very interesting. So the Pedro Ferrada site, they knew about the rock paintings. And the rock paintings dated back to 12,000 years ago, which is quite stunning. That's 1,500 years later than Clovis, but it's fine. People could have got to Brazil from Clovis over the course of 1,500 years. That made sense, right? To create what the wonderful rock art that we just briefly looked at. However, more importantly, charcoal from very ancient fires and stone shards that may have been interpreted as tools found at the location were dated to 32,000 years ago, which means that this site in Brazil is the oldest piece of archaeology excavated in North and South America to date. The earliest archaeology in the Americas is actually in Brazil, which really puts the cat amongst the pigeons. And guess what? They've found even earlier dates from the Pedro Ferrada site dating back to 48,000 years ago. They were aware of this wonderful rich landscape of archaeology in 1973, and they weren't aware of the dates. They started excavating the site in 1986. However, this is why the one thing about all of this is that the Pedro Ferrada site includes a collection of rock shelters, and those rock shelters have been occupied over up to 48,000 years. But occupied by whom? This is a very interesting question. The first excavations yielded charcoal deposits from radiocarbon charcoal deposits from 48,000 years ago. So the radiocarbon dates gave us 48,000 years ago to 32,000 years ago. And repeated analysis confirmed this dating, carrying the ranges of up to, wait for it, 60,000 years ago. So this is blowing our minds. So the evidence in Brazil is up to 4 times older than Clovis, right? And up to 3 times older than the Pennsylvanian evidence. A review of the site by an archaeologist known as Tom DeLahaye in 1994 suggested that the charcoal remains may have been from natural fires and were not necessarily indicative of human occupation. Well, that's interesting. That is interesting. Now, why is that interesting? Because whenever you look at Time Team or any programs on television and programs that contain the archaeologist Nick Card, who Mike's a personal friend of in Orkney, right? Whenever these archaeologists see charcoal layers, they always get dates from the charcoal layers, and they always say that those charcoal layers are indicative of human occupation, right? Nobody ever talks about natural fires. However, then the other archaeologists, they then argue, they say, hang on a minute, stop there, stop. They've actually found stones amongst the natural fires that have clearly been broken up. And they say, okay, we're not going to exclude the fact that there have been natural fires since for millions of years, right? But there are stones that clearly look like they've deliberately been broken. And because those stones have been broken and are amongst the charcoal, that is clear archaeological evidence that human beings have been here thousands of years before any of the other sites, right? So this site is actually near that site that we looked at the map in Brazil known as Toca da Tirapeia, which has actually got lots of archaeological evidence dating back to 22,000 years ago, including other work stones. So the significance of this is that if this dates everything in the Americas by thousands of years earlier, this is massively controversial. Massively controversial. Now, somebody then started to argue the following. Debate continues as to whether or not the artifacts and the hearths are instead geofacts that were made naturally or alternatively made by monkeys. The Capuchin monkey, the bearded monkey, is said to have been observed smashing stones together and smashing stones on the ground that could easily possibly indicate the humans have been done it. So Capuchin monkeys naturally break stones. They break stones up themselves, right? So if they had broken stones up 60,000 years ago and then maybe started a fire, right? This wasn't done by humans. This was actually done by monkeys. The resulting shaped rocks and flakes are similar to early hominid tools and flakes in Africa. It has been suggested that similar behavior by similar simians, earlier monkeys, might account for what have been regarded as human tools at Padre Ferrada. An archaeologist from Florida Atlantic University believes that the tools identified at the site as human-made rocks, well, obviously breaking them up, were just rocks that had fallen on the ground and had just broken up. It seems that there's a dividing line on the debate amongst archaeologists disputing these early theories of this site, and that people actively want to go out their way and sort of say that there was no pre-Clovis people in North America and South America, but there clearly were. The archaeologist who was working at the site at Pedro Ferrero, Aguadon, actually suggested that the reason why you've got evidence in South America is not because they came from the Bering Straits, was that they made a sea voyage across the Atlantic, stopping at some of the islands that we've actually looked at. It's also been claimed in the New York Times by Guidon, the archaeologist excavating at the site in Brazil. He claimed the occupation of the Americas could go back 100,000 years, and the first settlements might have come not overland from Asia, but by boat from Africa. Very, very controversial. At the most, the archaeologists will admit that the archaeological evidence in Brazil is at least 22,000 years old, which is a lot earlier than the archaeological evidence that's recently been found in Texas. And finally, the archaeologist Guidon, who had actually excavated at these sites in Brazil, he will have the last word. And this is where we're going to leave it today completely. We're going to leave it there with the archaeologist's work in South America. The carbon is not from a natural fire. It is only found inside the sites. You don't get natural fires inside the shelters. There you go. It's very difficult to get natural fires inside a shelter which has an average temperature of 11 degrees C all year round. Guidon goes on to say, the problem is that the Americans criticize without knowing, talking about the North Americans. The problem is not mine, the problem is theirs. Americans should excavate more and write less. I've been saying that from day one. There's not enough data. What American archaeologists like to do is they like to reinvent the wheel over and over again. And we don't have enough evidence from North America to disprove the evidence in South America. That's what he's saying. French Paleolithic archaeologist Jacques Peregrine believes there is a possibility for natural processes creating flakes stones that could mimic the Pedra Forada specimens because of their simplicity. But he finds this very unlikely in this case because of the continuous human presence at the site. So the last word is given to the fact that some of the earliest evidence in North America might, some of the earliest evidence the Americans might actually be from the south. And these people may not have got there from across the Bering Straits. However, I'm not going to side on anyone's side. All I'm going to say is that the evidence in North America is far, far older than we could have ever taken the leap of imagination to believe. On that note, what we're going to do, we're going to call it a day, and we're going to stop the sharing. Are there any questions from... Let's start off with Andrea and get your mic up ready, Henry. Anything from you, Andrea? Nothing from Andrea?
No, nothing for me today, thanks.
Are you going to be joining Jessica next week?
If I'm back, yes.
Right, okay, that's fair enough. Anyway,
what's happening yet? So if you could let her know for me. I apologise for not letting her know today. I didn't know I was going to have to go.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. That's okay. She heard you. I mentioned that on the phone. What about you, Henri?
No, really intriguing. I think you're right. There's a lot more digging to be done than actually writing.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Whereas in Europe we've got a lot more writing to do from the digging, but in America it's very different. We need more data. This is what we're saying. I'm always one of these that I believe that we've excavated enough archaeology in Britain. We need to analyse it. And finally, Goff.
Yeah, no questions. Very thought-provoking, good images. So thank you.
Many thanks. And next week we're doing something unusual. We're going to be looking at the reuse of Roman remains in Britain. That's what we're doing next week. And Mike, anything you'd like to say?
No, it's very good, interesting.
Good. And how did that sound, Michelle, with Michelle's week off work? She said it was fab, so we got Michelle saying fab. And Baldrick, what do you say, Baldrick? Inyow!
I'm getting down to catch the bus.
Oh, okay then. I want a quick hang on, stay there a minute, Mike. I'm only going to be a couple of seconds. Right, okay then, guys. Is there any more questions before we go?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Goff and Henry and Andrea, I will see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you, Goff and Henry and Andrea. Bye. Bye-bye.